Hey guys, Brandon Kowallis here, Director of the Salt Lake Community College Concurrent Enrollment Program. And today in this episode, we're going to be talking with Cyd Grua at the Utah System of Higher Education to share with us a little bit about how concurrent enrollment programs across the state of Utah, including Salt Lake Community College, are funded. Where does the money come from and how does that all work? So with that said, let's go ahead and jump over and I'm going to introduce you to Cyd Grua. The first question, Cyd, that I'd like to ask you is one of the things that I hear a lot whenever I attend the national conference is folks will ask me, they'll say, so how exactly is your program funded in the state of Utah? So I'm wondering if you can maybe take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about how concurrent enrollment funding works in the state of Utah. And maybe, if you can give us a little bit of history on how that came about, how that funding model came about, that would be wonderful. So, if you have any insights to share with us, please do so. We'd love to hear those.
The legislature feels like concurrent enrollment is its baby, and they're very proud of it. And we've had it in our state since the middle 80s. And the legislature started providing an appropriation to do that compensation for earned credit back in the middle 90s. And I would say historically, one of the interesting things was they just kind of gave us money. There was no method or rhyme or reason for it. They aspired 20 years ago to give us $50 of credit. And sometimes one year to the next, I'm waiting for that to happen in the year 2020. But they very much wanted to provide funding for it. When they started the program, students paid nothing to take a class. It was free, and it was free until about 8 years ago. And then they the institutions kind of said, the appropriation that you're giving us, thank you very much, isn't enough to cover our costs. So we needed some more. They floated some legislation that allows us to charge $5, $10, $15, or $30. Now, it's too much complexity to go into the detail of the 5, 10, 15, or 30, but the $5 is the linchpin. What they said in statute is you can't charge more than $5 per credit for a student who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. And so we've kept it at that amount for 8 years now. It's kind of a blessing and a curse to have an appropriation, because the legislature wants you to do this. They want you to be happy with a smile on your face, but they're also going to tell you how much you can charge for things. And I think that sometimes creates problems. In someone's infinite wisdom, about 10 years ago, they said, we need to start, this program is 25 years old. Let's start finding a way to grow that annual appropriation more thoughtfully, more methodically. Let's put in a growth formula. And they put in a growth formula that looked at the number of earned credits last year and the number of earned credits the year before, and looked at the increase. And then that was the way they decided how to increase our appropriation every year. And this is super cool. And this is what any state trying to work with the legislature should do. Give us this pot of money, and then let's talk about how much more you're going to give us next year when our program grows. One thing that I would say you have to learn to do is look at your formula every couple of years, because our formula was giving us $400,000 or $600,000 more a year. We're only in the like $12 or $13 million appropriation, so truth in advertising. It was giving us more money, and it was keeping pace with the program. And the formula, then what happened was the program started growing beyond the formula. And for 5 years, the amount of money we got per every earned credit kept on going down, and we had to revisit it. And this year, the legislature passed a law that will pay us for the growth of our program in a way that it will keep pace with the program growth. Super cool. But states, you're going to have ebb and flows of your student population, and when the kindergarten class is huge and expanding, maybe the high school classes aren't. So you need to kind of think about that. But we now have a base appropriation, and we have a growth formula that takes into consideration the growth of the program. And we don't have to go back to the legislature every year and beg for more money. It's very, very smart. So get your pot and then ask for growth at the same time.
Awesome. So My next question has to do with how that funding is distributed. I mean, once the legislature allocates money to concurrent enrollment, how exactly is that money then distributed to public ed and higher ed? And are there any rules that sort of govern how that money can and cannot be used?
One quick historic note. 10 years ago, each institution negotiated with each district or charter school, we call them LEAs, local education agencies, they negotiated the price of offering courses to students. Mm. And when we went to this model of the growth formula, et cetera, that kind of leveled out the playing field, and there was no longer shopping around for 50 cents per credit less for earned credit. Everyone does the same. And at least in Utah, that's a good thing, because in years when money's lean, higher ed gets a cut, public education, the weighted pupil unit stays the same. So it's been good for Utah that that money was almost sheltered by the public ed people. The state awards and the appropriation, it goes to public ed. We have to match credits. We have to match an enrollment at one of our institutions with an enrollment in a district to be able to get part of that appropriation. And we match the credit at the system offices, and we decide which part of that money goes to the districts and the charters, and how much goes to our office, goes to the public institutions in the state. And once we've done that match and agreed to it, we write a memo to public ed and we say, we want a portion of that 12 million. Here's what it is. Give it to us. Here's our numbers. So that's one thing. We have a system split. The other thing to consider is how we divide the money once we've split it between the systems. In Utah, 86% of the credit year in, year out is taught by a teacher who's an adjunct to one of our institutions in a high school. This solves a lot of problems in Utah. We're a rural state. We have crazy bell schedules. Following the bell schedule is a good thing. And when we can, we adjunct teachers to teach for us. The legislature added another formula when they added the growth funding, and that is that he who pays the cost of instruction, because your cost of instruction is the most expensive single cost in a concurrent program, gets 60%. So when we're doing that division, we use budget codes coming out of public ed saying we taught it, they taught it, coming out of higher ed, sorry, we taught it, they taught it, and we do a division that's a 60-40, and she usually gets about 45% of that big pot, and public ed gets that 55% of that big pot. Okay. I can't tell you I know exactly how public ed disperses that money to its districts, but it knows who earned credit where, and it disperses the money 1/12 every month to the districts for that concurrent enrollment activity. In our case, our budget officers looked at that 60-40 split and said, wait a minute, if we're paying a faculty member to teach a course, it's a lot more costly for us than if we're paying a faculty member or a staff person to in the districts. So they chose to divide their money differently. They do an 80-20 split. But we know where the earned credit was, we know who taught it, and based on whether we taught it or we supervised an adjunct to teach it, money is then dispersed from the system office to each one of the UC institutions. And we used to spread money out based on attempted credit, because a kid attempts a credit and they withdraw or they fail, add effort to help that student through the concurrent course. But public ed's rule was earned credit only, and when we did calculations, we actually discovered that whether we dispersed our money based on earned or attempted makes no difference for our institutions. So you get 5% of the kids withdraw or fail, and we're equal opportunity institutions. It's the same amount across each of the 8 institutions. So are there better ways to do it? The positive about this model is we don't have districts and institutions shopping for better prices on concurrent enrollment courses. It's set by the legislature. Another positive is kind of how much you're going to get from one year to next. Okay. The negative about it might be that if you have, like we have just experienced, if the growth of the program exceeds the growth formula, et cetera, you're going to have some lean years. But I kind of, having experienced both, prefer the fact that we're all treating the program the same across the state for money.
All right, so just one last question, and that is for anybody out there across the nation who's maybe looking at Utah saying, huh, that's interesting. And by no means, I mean, is Utah the only or the best way to handle concurrent enrollment funding? But if someone were out there and they said, that is really interesting, and I'd like to pursue something like that, what advice would you give them? Where would they need to start in considering or exploring the funding model sort of that we use for concurrent enrollment?
I speak kind of out of ignorance, kind of, and I'm speaking out of going to NASEP conferences
Mm-hmm.
and hearing what other states are doing. And I hear that in other states, students pay full tuition. I hear other states, there's probably still a few states where it's free. We used to be free, but that was a decade ago. Um, I hear other states, they give students like almost a checkbook. We're going to give you an allowance of this much money that you can spend on courses. So one thing is for sure, every state's different about that. Um, I like the idea of an appropriation that kind of guarantees us that at least our direct costs are going to be covered for the program. And I guess one of my messages is, if you're going to go to the legislature and ask for money, um, build a formula that shows your direct costs, and the same formula that shows what it costs for you to deliver a course on campus. In 86% of our courses, the light bill is being paid by a district, not an institution. They're providing the chair and the classroom. And so the overhead that you're going to calculate on the cost of developing that program isn't as great. I think also, so be realistic about what it costs to develop the program and to deliver it, knowing that it's going to be different than what your campus costs are. The other thing I think that comes to my mind is recognizing that this is an interesting thing, and I don't want anyone to shoot me for it. We have gotten so much more exposure to the concurrent program when we started charging students $5 a credit. I know it's only $5 a credit. It's this great, fabulous thing that we do for Utah students. When it was free, no one ever talked about it. And I wonder if maybe some people took it for granted. So I like the notion, if you're going to ask the legislature for funding, that you say it's okay for students to contribute to the cost of the program and to pay something. And I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, but I think it makes a difference for people. It is meaningful, even if it's only a small amount of money. And finally, I would say, in today's age, if you're going to ask for appropriation, tell them that you've thought through considerations for kids who are, I think the term now is experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage, first generation students of color, students that are kind of on the fringe, that may not be able to afford even a small cost for tuition and the book and the application fee. And say you've thought that through, and here's how you're going to handle those unique populations. So be realistic at what you think your direct costs are. Don't use the same overhead formula used on campus, because it isn't the same, especially if you're teaching in high schools. I guess it could be more. And take into consideration things like how you're going to work with students for whom the costs are prohibitive.
Um,
And be prepared to have lots of strings attached and report every year and say thank you, and report more and more. It's worth it.
All right, now hopefully that gives you some fantastic ideas of some things that maybe you can think about when it comes to funding your program or other programs there across your state. And I should say that this is, of course, by no means the best way or the only way to fund a concurrent enrollment program. I mean, there are so many different ways that you can acquire funding in order to operate your program. But I just wanted to share this with you because, I mean, a lot of people have questions out there of, how exactly are we funded? So anyway, hopefully that gives you some great ideas. And until the next episode, remember that nothing is impossible if you're resourceful, if you think outside the box, outside those walls that we're enclosed in at times, and then last of all, if you have the courage to act.